My name is Luis Salazar. I'm a product marketing manager here at WP Engine. I'll be joined with Kellen Mace, a all-star developer, headless wizard, headless magician, and he leads our developer relations team. So why are we all here today? Well, we're here to talk about headless. And more importantly, we're here to talk about how headless can grow your agency. So, whether you're an agency owner or a developer working with an agency, or whether you're tasked with growing your agency as a business developer, bringing on new clientele, what we want to do is provide you with support, with education, and the tooling to be able to explain what headless is and to decide if headless is the project of choice for your clients. So, we're going to talk about headless. We're going to get on the same page, same foundation. Going to give you some use cases for headless, some things to listen for, some questions to ask, and we'll also dive into when is headless not the best solution for the project. Lastly, we'll talk about how WP Engine accelerates headless for agencies. So, got a lot of great content. Really excited for everybody who's registered. I'm dialing in from Austin, Texas, but please let us know where you're at and let us know your experiences with Headless, and let's kick this off and get started. So, a lot of content. So, what are we talking about when we're talking about headless? I don't want to assume everybody here knows what we mean when we say headless. But if you do know what headless is, it's great to just simplify things so that we can take these, complex technical, ideas and effectively bring our clients on board. So this is how we do it. First and foremost, there's WordPress, right? WordPress is everything in a box. It's great. It's been driving the internet for over a decade, right? It allows you to render everything in one place. So WordPress gives you not only the database, it allows you to manage users. It also allows a platform. So the WP admin is a place where content creators can go in and create that content. It's everything in a box, and it's amazing. You may hear WordPress as termed as monolithic, and this is because everything again is in that box, software in a box, everything all included for you. Now, simply put, headless is taking that WordPress and using it solely for the backend. So your database, the content, but instead of rendering everything, the front end is decoupled and rendered by something else. Now, typically this is JavaScript like Next, React, SvelteKit, but it's essentially anything else that is rendering the front end. Now, here's where a lot of people pause and they say, great, I get it. I understand headless. But that's like going to a theme park and only riding one ride. When we talk about headless, there's so much more value because there's so much more that we can do. A prime example is you can use WordPress as the backend to push content to multiple front ends. So if we're thinking of a media site, let's think of a news site, right? You have the website, it has all the content, you're able to read all the articles, but then most news sites also have a mobile app, and you're needing to push that content to the mobile app as well. So Headless allows WordPress to push out content to multiple channels. That's a great advantage, but it doesn't stop there. You can also have multiple backends. So various layers of technology can integrate to provide a more capable experience, not only for the end user, but for your content creators and your site managers as well. Let's take a site like the New York Times, for example. Again, going back to the fact that they have their website, they have their mobile site, they also have really cool things baked in, like your daily crosswords, Sudoku, or all of our favorite Wordle, right? Typically, that's not going to be published from a CMS like WordPress. They may have like a gaming engine that is actually pushing that content out to both the website and to the mobile application as well. So in tandem, you can use multiple backends to publish to multiple front ends as well. So, what's the value here? Well, the value here is flexibility. You now open up uh, multiple channels to distribute your content. You now push the boundaries of innovation because you can use multiple different backends to accomplish your project. It brings, again, that flexibility to your project. Now, I like to wrap everything up with a nice analogy. And this is something that we typically use here, but I would love to hear from anybody who may have dabbled in headless, how you have explained to your clients what headless is. So feel free to drop in chat any sort of analogies that you've used, any sort of quips that you use that has really helped, kind of turn the light bulb on for your clients. In our case, we're going to use the analogy of a restaurant. Now, when we go to a restaurant, we typically go to a building, right? And that building has everything that's needed. You've got your kitchen staff, you have your waiting staff, you get to experience everything in that environment, and you really get to digest that content right then and there. Now, that's a little bit different with headless. With headless, think of like a ghost kitchen or a cloud kitchen, right? Typically, this kitchen area is optimized only for cooking. And most times it's like in the industrial area of the city. You got a lot of stainless steel. It's not very inviting. You're not going to go there and sit down and eat a meal. There's no wait staff at all, but it is optimized to make the meal. And then you yourself may be sitting on the couch, watching some college football, and then you hop on an app and say, I'm hungry, I want to order some Thai food, or maybe some Chinese food. And so you jump on there and you send a request. Now that request goes to the kitchen, and we can consider this like an API call going to that kitchen. The staff there makes the meal, and then in a few minutes somebody picks up the meal and delivers it to you. So you're not having to digest all of that content in one place. You're not at the kitchen, the industrial kitchen, eating that meal. They're bringing that content to you. They're bringing it to where you're at, that channel that you're in, your couch. And so that's an analogy that we like to use. Neither is better than the other. That's the key point here. It's about the job that needs to be done. And so when you can understand what job needs to be done, you can readily explain how headless can solve that problem. And so one thing that we do want to highlight here is a report that we did last year. Now, headless has been around for almost about a decade because of the REST API. The REST API is the way that you can communicate with other channels. And so headless is not a new concept. But what is exciting is that the growing adoption and familiarity from larger organizations wanting to actually dive into these headless implementations, these decoupled architectures. And so what we are seeing is that more and more people are becoming familiar with this, which means as an agency, your jobs will not only become easier in explaining what headless is and how it can really propel your client's growth, but it also means that everybody is going towards these new innovations, these new adoptions of technology. So I mentioned earlier about some, use cases and things to hear and keep an ear out for, and we want to go through some of those examples. And so multi-channel and multi-CMS is what we talked about, and want to talk more about the multi-channel approach. Typically, if you're dealing with like a big media site, this is a natural progression, entering in different domains, entering different channels. So when you're talking to your clients and you're having these one-on-one conversations, if you start to feel the conversation going towards getting into new channels, whether that be mobile applications or whether your client has landed a deal to syndicate and publish their content someplace else, that's where you can start to think, okay, Well, this is where headless may actually come in because if we're looking at this example, like a magazine site, right? You've got the magazine WordPress or you got the magazine website. Everybody goes there, but then you have your mobile application, you have your iOS app, you have your Android app. But then to the point of maybe landing a contract, your client may also need to syndicate that content to the back of an airline seat. We've all been there, been on the tarmac, kind of just clicking through the airline seat and looking at content. Well, that content has to come from somewhere. And so Headless could really solve that by pushing content to multiple channels. So I want to give you a real life example here. We do have a food conglomerate that has an issue with publishing content to over 13 individual domains. And so what they did is they set up WordPress as the single instance to publish that content to all 13 of those domains. And they did it very successfully. Now, that's not the only use case. Another use case is one that we're keeping an eye on very intently is the e-commerce um, segment. And what we're starting to see is, you know, people starting to use other e-commerce platforms. But what they fail to get out of those platforms is the content capability of WordPress. WordPress does an amazing job with SEO or GEO, and so what we see is some customers use a different CMS for their ecom, but they use WordPress for their content and they publish that to one site. An example here is Combat Corner. Combat Corner did exactly this. They were using BigCommerce to process the transactions, but they still needed that content to be published to the website. And so they're still using WordPress. And the two combined really give this flexibility, as I mentioned before, to Combat Corner. And now to talk a little bit more about that, I do want to bring in Kellen and let him talk a little bit more about this.
Thanks, Luis. Hey, everyone, and thank you again so much for being here to join us today. Yeah, I'll kick off the next section talking about the benefits that composability can bring for headless WordPress. All right, so the first we'll talk about is jobs to be done, right? You may have heard that popular phrase. Really, it boils down to choosing the best tool for a given job, right? For the work to be done. So as you all likely know on the call, with traditional WordPress, you really have one choice for what's doing the rendering of those front end pages. The CMS that you're using, it comes with all of its content creation and management goodness, but also takes care of rendering all those pages. There really isn't a second option, right? WordPress is kind of a do-it-all solution. For some types of websites, that's fantastic. That's exactly what you need, right? But not for all, right? For other types of applications, perhaps going back to what Luis talked about, related to multiple sources of data, for example, it may make more sense to decouple those and still use WordPress for all of its fantastic content management capabilities, but instead choose SvelteKit or Next.js or Astro or one of these frameworks, because it's going to allow you to have some of the fine-grained control over how pages are cached and rendered. Some of the things we'll talk about in a few slides here, or because you have the scenario of multiple sources, right? Some data is coming from WordPress, some's from Shopify, some's from whatever else. It may make sense to decouple those, and now it gives you optionality, right? Now you get to pick which front end out there in the world is going to be the absolute best for this particular project. Next slide. So for this one, we'll talk about just this era of AI explosion that we're in right now. It's really accelerating the need for composable architectures like this. So if for your website you have the system that's doing all the content creation and content management, and the system doing all the rendering all in one, it might be more cumbersome to hook that into these new agentic workflows that so many businesses out there are exploring and trying to leverage. If those two are separate, however, then you can independently push and pull data to and from WordPress, and likewise push and pull data to and from the front end pages of your front end application. So you have to use your imagination to figure out, like, well, which of these agents online would I possibly hook up to my WordPress site? And the answer is whatever you can dream up. Really, is that's the era, this agentic web era that we're entering. But having a decoupled architecture, I think, can help you set you up for that kind of a future when that's a need for the project. Next slide. So for this one, I want to dive into speed and scalability, right? So for those of you tuning in, you know that WordPress can be very fast, can be very scalable, especially with a great, caching solution in place. WordPress can be blazing fast and cached at the edge, close to users and so on. But sometimes, depending on the type of site that it is, it becomes harder to do that with traditional WordPress, and some additional capabilities that Headless can afford you really can help with this. Next slide. All right, so the first, I'll just rattle through three of the big ones here. So the first is faster page transitions. You may have noticed this if you ever used React or another single page application framework, where you're clicking through the pages and it just seems like kind of an instant cut over, an instant transition from one to the other. Part of the reason for that is it's doing, instead of going back to the server and saying, oh, the user's requested this next page, give me all of it, the entire HTML document, give me all of the HTML and CSS. Now I need to parse and download, I need to parse and execute all of those assets. And then the process repeats every time the person clicks a link. What these frameworks that use a client-side redirect or client-side navigation, what they do instead is they only update the parts of the page that need it and only fetch the data that's needed for that particular part of the page. But anything else that, like the header and footer, anything else that doesn't need to be blown away and recreated, it just leaves them. It just leaves them in place, on the page, which can make things speedier. And also, like I mentioned, the assets, instead of having to reparse and re-download the JavaScript and CSS each time for each new page, that only happens once on the initial page load, and then not again after that. So it can provide these additional like speed gains when you're really trying to eke out like a lot of performance. Next one I'll talk about, the middle tile here is fewer assets with code splitting, right? So with these component-based frameworks, based on React or Vue or Svelte or whatever, the build tool that builds your application is able to tell for each given page of your application all of the components required to render that page. So they can do a thing called code splitting, where they just include in the JavaScript bundle and the styles everything needed for that particular route, right? So any styles like on the about page needs, those won't even be loaded if someone lands on your homepage. Those will only be loaded if someone navigates over there and they're actually needed. So this can help with, in Google Chrome, for example, if you run a Lighthouse audit, sometimes you get dinged for unused CSS or unused JavaScript, right? Just because you're loading really more than the current page needs. In traditional WordPress, that there are tricks there you can do to only load certain assets on certain pages, but these component-based frameworks really give you granular control over that, so you can really just load exactly what's needed for a given route. So that can help as performance as well. Last one I'll talk about is total rendering control. So you may have heard terms out there that developer techie folks like using, such as server-side rendering, client-side rendering, and even new fancier ones like incremental static regeneration, and so on, or SSG, static site generation, or rendering pages statically. These are all different methods for which you can render pages. In a traditional WordPress setup, you can employ the use of a CDN and cache the output of your pages at the edge, meaning like at data centers close to your users. All of that's possible, but in my experience, it becomes more difficult if you want to get very granular and do this on a page by page basis. So if, say, my about page almost never changes, statically render that. So it's just at the edge all the time. This other page involves user account data. I want to go to the server every time to get that person's exact account, information right now, right at this moment, with no caching whatsoever. Don't do anything. Don't do any caching in this page. This other one, do a combination where you're caching it, but still refreshing that busting the cache and refreshing it every, 30 minutes or something. You can do that on a page by page basis. You can kind of have that fine grained control over how things are rendered. So again, these things, they may sound like micro optimizations as I'm mentioning them, but they can stack up, especially for those like performance critical websites out there. Next slide. All right, so for security, um, next slide, we can dive into this. Thanks, Luis. All right, so as I've said a few times, you all on the call know, I would assume WordPress itself, traditional WordPress, can be very secure, right? If you're always keeping WordPress core updated, always using reputable plugins, keeping those plugins updated. I've even worked myself for agencies in the past that would do a security audit, right, of a plugin and say, this is one that we've audited and we approve. It's on our list of approved plugins we'll actually consider on a client project. Anything that's not on there hasn't been vetted, we're not even going to use it, right? So there's a pretty high bar there, and you can make WordPress very secure with those kinds of practices. Even still, though, for those of you who work with clients, which is nearly everyone, I think, that a lot of times the web server gets bombarded by these bots and spammers and everyone else trying to hit endpoints on WordPress sites, to find a PHP file that maybe its access control hasn't been locked down appropriately, and they're trying to see if they can hack the site, somehow, or do some shady crypto things or whatever their intent may be, right? That's possible. They know that your site is a WordPress site. You'll just get bombarded with those requests if you look at your access logs, right? And you do have to make sure things are buttoned up so that you're not vulnerable to those kinds of security attacks. But you can't close off your site to the web, right? Because you have to leave it open for legitimate visitors. They have to be able to send requests, right? So by having it on the web, you're kind of telling everyone, this is a WordPress install for anything you might throw at it. Here it is, right? With Headless, you can have a reduced attack surface and enhanced API security. So you can lock things down further. So for example, like with the little graphic here, imagine, WordPress, we have WordPress on one end and then a SvelteKit application on the other. The SvelteKit app, at build time, when it's trying to render its pages, it sends a request to somewhere on the web where this mysterious WordPress site lives. No one even knows what the URL is. That's obfuscated away, right? It sends a request over, and it includes some API credentials as well. WordPress then is able to verify, is this a legitimate request from the front end API? Do the credentials match? If so, that's the only condition in which I'm going to send my data back to the front end. And you can close it off there and say, for every other web request that's possible, reject, right? Don't serve those kinds of requests. You can do this even further if you have like a company intranet and so on, where your WordPress backend, maybe it isn't even on the open web at all. It's just internally when your app builds, it has access to that. But then the open web WordPress isn't even present. It's only your front end application that presents these pages. So some thoughts there. There are like additional optionality, I would say, for how to lock down security. All right, next slide. All right, next I want to talk about developer experience here. So those of you, our agency friends we have tuning in today, you probably know, you're just doing, due to a lot of hiring and so on, a lot of new developers in particular are learning. JavaScript is the bee's knees these days, right? They're going through boot camps and so on and learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then when they're ready to make their pages more interactive, it's typically React, first. They're learning that the JavaScript stack typically. So you can play to people's strengths instead of only looking for developers who maybe know WordPress's like theme and plugin APIs and have a background in PHP, because things are moving in the developer community really heavily toward this JS environment, JS based development. You can leverage that if you have headless WordPress sites. Maybe that's the stack that some of your folks are more comfortable in working with, or otherwise your clients, right? Maybe the folks on their end who are going to maintain this site, maybe they're like, well, we all went through these boot camps and we all know JavaScript very well. If you throw some PHP based stuff at us, or a new block, a block theme at us, we won't really know, how to maintain that very well. That could be a compelling reason to consider a headless. Next is the JavaScript ecosystem. It's gigantic. The WordPress plugin directory has 60,000 plugins. Okay. The NPM repository for JavaScript has upwards of 3 million, right? And more isn't necessarily better, of course, right? We want quality and not quantity, but that just shows you with a factor of almost six, if I'm doing that math right, I think almost 6 times larger. There's just packages for nearly everything you can think of in the JavaScript ecosystem. It's a force these days. And if you need some of those packages, it's something to consider. Right now you have access to that. Last one is a component architecture. I touched on this briefly, but this is effectively, and React was really the framework that really popularized this idea of having a single component where you have your markup and your JavaScript for any interactivity, and even your styles, in many cases, scoped to that component. And it makes your application very easy to reason about, because you have those things kind of housed within this one component that you can then stack on top of other components like Lego blocks and so on. So many developers, especially those earlier in their careers, really thinking in terms of components and building blocks is appealing to them. And Headless gives you that. It just makes your whole site component driven like that. So some thoughts there on developer experience. The next slide. All right. All right. I'm getting close to time, so I'll try to be quick on this one. But why not Headless, right? Is it the right solution all the time? I think someone's deceiving you if they say, "Oh yeah, 100% of the time." Like anything else in tech, right? There are reasons not to do it. In my mind, these are a few of the big ones. So if the client you're working with says we want the full site editing capabilities of WordPress, and for our marketing team to be able to swap out the header and footer and sidebars and everywhere, you want them to be able to customize it themselves. Headless doesn't really give you that. The idea of Headless is you're kind of deferring the rendering to this other system over here, right? And it's making the decisions for how those things look and are rendered. So I would say, that would be a reason to consider not doing Headless. The middle one is a page builder or visual plugins are needed. If your client says, we love Elementor, we love Beaver Builder, we love whatever, our business is built on that, our team's comfortable with it, Headless would take that away if that's a requirement for the project. So maybe don't consider it in that case. And last one, developers aren't experienced with the tech required for Headless. So this would be, if you have this decoupled architecture and you deliver the site to your clients, and then they say, well, we don't know how to maintain that. This tech stack we're not quite familiar with, right? They would have to, be comfortable with that handoff and the ongoing maintenance of that site if they're going to be the ones maintaining it. So that was it for me. I'll turn it back to Luis for our next section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kellen. Again, magician, all-star developer. I can listen to Kellen talk all the time because I always learn something. What we want to do in the last minute here is give you an explanation of what's in it for you if you decide to come to WP Engine. First and foremost, everything in one platform. You have optimized WordPress. You have the JS front end being not only served, but able to auto scale. You have optimized tooling. You have one invoice. And most importantly, you have support under one roof. You have that full stack visibility. And so this really improves the efficiency of going to market faster, more things in one place, which then in turn improves your ROI. When you are with WP Engine, you can save time and costs. And then on the other side, you get to earn more because headless projects are more complex. These are higher ticket projects. In addition, differentiation. All of you here do an amazing job with your agencies, but you may be one agency out of 12 in a town or one out of 1,000 in a big city. So what are you doing to differentiate yourself? With Headless, you are setting yourself apart when you're able to implement headless architectures and composability and flexibility. And it also future proofs you. Now, we're not saying get rid of monolithic WordPress because it's old. Like Kellen said, Headless is not the solution for every single project. But when you start to develop with Headless, what it does, it allows you to be ready to bring in new technologies. And that's really the advantage and sets you apart from other agencies, is being able to innovate and do creative things for your clients. We covered a lot today. We definitely hope we presented Headless in a way that stands out to your agency and offers new growth opportunities. Now, we also do want to highlight and showcase that we offer a sandbox so that you can play around with our WP Engine Headless platform. So please take a look and chat. Definitely looking forward to the next time. Thank you so much.